Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about 8 great memoirs that I read in 2020. Rather than doing one video of like my top 10 or top 20 books, I'm breaking it up by genre. I am incredibly indecisive. So we're just going to have a long series of videos going on through November or December, maybe into January, depending on when I can edit everything. It'll come out whenever it comes out. But it's going to be a series of videos rather than just a one top list, because I've read way more this year than I have in any other year. Currently, I've read over 150 books. I am on track to make or go past the 175 goal that I made on Goodreads, which wasn't even my original goal. My original goal was 100. So, I've read a lot. I'm indecisive. We're having lots of lists. Today I'm going to be talking about memoirs, but you can also expect a list on general nonfiction later, poetry, and graphic novels. And then I'll also be doing 2 top 10 lists. One for adult fiction, which is mostly literary with a few sci-fi fantasy, and then another list for young adult fiction. So, lots of things going on to be expected at some point. Today we're focused on memoirs. A lot of these I've talked about a number of times before, and some of them I haven't had the chance to talk about nearly as much. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order by author last name. So, first on the list, I have Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. I read this earlier on in the year and really loved it. This was one of the first graphic novels that one of the first graphic memoirs that I'd read, and I really loved it. It's like a comic, but there's also a lot of narration that goes on around it, and I think she does that really well. I thought the focus on this memoir was really interesting. It's specifically looking at her relationship with her dad, and this was a very kind of strained, sort of distant relationship for the most part, and it explores kind of her childhood and looking at it. And one of the big things that's being explored through this is like who her dad actually was, because after he died, she found out that he had been with men. He'd been having affairs with younger men. And the author is lesbian, so there's kind of this kind of potential connection that she could have had with her dad, first of all. There's some explanation, I think, for the perfectionist element, and there's sort of the question of, what could have been if he was more true to himself, and that sort of thing. There's also a lot of suspicious stuff around her dad's death itself. So whether or not it was a suicide, that's a piece of it as well. Overall, this was just really incredible. There's a reason that it's iconic. There's actually a musical made from this, which I've not seen the musical, and that sounds like an interesting decision for like a medium to take this on. I don't really know what sort of tone this musical would have. So I'm interested in finding out if I can find a copy. But I really loved Fun Home as a book. The next book that I have is Laura Jane Grace's memoir. The title is a slur, but the subtitle is Confessions of Punk Rock's Most Infamous Anarchist, Sellout. I really enjoyed reading this book. I read this during April. It was National Poetry Month, and I thought that it was very apt that I would read something by someone who writes music, which is, tangential to poetry. It is a type of poetry. I really love Against Me, which is the band that Laura Jane Grace heads, and this whole story, I think, gives new perspective to a lot of her music. This basically goes through her life, through her childhood and introduction into the punk scene. She talks a fair amount about a lot of her relationships, as well as her relationship with her gender, because she did not come out as a trans woman until a little bit later, after she'd already started the band and everything like that. This is a very, raw, very candid memoir. There are actually pieces of her journal that are put in here, and you get to hear a lot. And not all of it puts her in a good light whatsoever. Like, she's pretty honest when she is the asshole in some of these situations. And she doesn't, like, sugarcoat some of the bad stuff that she's done either. Just in general. I really, really enjoyed it. I actually listened to her music as I read. Each different section is actually named after one of the songs. So you've got Walking is Still Honest, I Was a Teenage Anarchist, and one of these is actually named after a documentary-ish style, really more like TV special style thing that they put together that I found on YouTube. I forget which one it was. I'll maybe link it in comments, but it was interesting to see that in relationship to the book too, which I stopped and watched what I could find of it while I was reading, or, you know, on a break from reading, but while I got to the chapter. So overall, it was a really great experience. I think it's an interesting memoir, and especially if you're a fan of Laura Jane Grace or Against Me, I definitely think that this is worth the read. The next memoir I have is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This memoir is targeted at YA, so it's kind of housed in the YA nonfiction. So it is very accessible in a lot of ways, but I would think that you definitely don't have to be a young adult reader to read it, which I also think about other YA too. But throughout this book, they talk about their experience with their sexuality, their race, but really family is a huge theme within this as well. There's also some discussion about gender, although it's a little bit less direct than the discussion about sexuality. But this was a really hard-hitting book. I really loved a lot of it. I think the perspective and focus on family is one of the things that made this really interesting, because while this is about sexuality and stuff like that, it's definitely very much about relationships. And they talk about their relationship with their grandmother is a really big piece, their mom, and towards the end they even write letters to a couple of the people from their family, and one of them is a trans person who was in their family that I don't think that they got to be as close to. I will say that if you're going to read this, to check out the author's note before you start reading, because they do talk about some of the kind of trigger warnings. They talk about sexual assault, homophobia, racism. There are slurs in the book. And then there's also discussion of chronic illnesses. Specifically, his grandma has cancer. And that's something that I wasn't really expecting until it happened on the page. So go in knowing those things. But overall, this was a really well-written and impactful memoir. Next, I have a book that I read in January, and that is My Lesbian Experience with Lonliness by Nagata Kabi. I also read the 2 sequels to this, which were My Solo Exchange Diary Volumes 1 and 2. Volume 1 I read immediately after, and Volume 2 I read last month, and actually vlogged about it a little bit. Maybe it was the beginning of this month. Regardless, My Lesbian Experience with Lonliness was my favorite one. It was so good that I bought my own copy of it, even though I had originally borrowed it from the library. In general, with Nagata Kabi's memoir series, it's interesting to see the different things that she focuses on, because this is, you know, My Lesbian Experience with Lonliness, but it's not really a typical coming out or coming of age narrative. It really is more about, you know, the loneliness aspect. It's about the mental health aspect, and I think that's true throughout the whole series. And it also doesn't just focus on her relationship with other, like, women romantically, but it talks about her relationship with her family, and especially in the sequels, she goes on to talk about their relationship with, like, her friends, and learning what sort of intimate relationships that she needed, not in a necessarily romantic sense, but also, like, familial and platonic intimacies as well. So there's a lot of good, interesting stuff that she's talking about. And into the second volume of my solo exchange diary, she even gets a little bit meta and talks about what it's like to release a memoir and something like that. And the pressure of knowing that people have a certain idea of you, and I thought that was really interesting. So the whole series is interesting. I think that the first one has a more cohesive narrative. My solo exchange diaries read as diary entries, which makes sense by the title, but it kind of caught me off guard a little bit after reading the first one. I think that the first one, there were certain things when she's talking about her mental health that really resonated with me. So I ended up really getting a lot out of this book. Now, the next two books that I have to talk about, if I did a ranked list, they would definitely be on the top 5, probably be in the top 3 for nonfiction. First, I have When They Call You a Terrorist by Patrisse Khan-Cullors and Asha Bandele. This is a memoir about Patrisse Khan-Cullors, who is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. She talks about growing up in California in the age of stop and frisk laws in the late 80s and early 90s. And she talks about how not only those laws, but the whole relationship of the Black community to the police really impacted her and really impacted the men in her life, kind of how she saw all of that happening. In particular, she talks about one of her brothers who has mental illnesses that impacted how the police treated him. So she talks about all of this and why she got into activism, the trajectory that her activism has gone on. She also talks about being queer and different things that queer people in the Black community have kind of contributed to all of this. So there's just so much good stuff in this memoir, and it's really beautifully written. So I definitely recommend this. It's one of the best books that I've read this year. Another one of my favorites for the whole year is In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. This is a really incredible memoir, and it's very unique. It's written primarily in second person, which means that rather than saying, in first person, the narrator would be saying I a whole lot. In third person, you would be hearing he said, she said, that sort of thing. But in second person, it's you, and you are the character. And in this second person memoir, she is talking about her experience being in an abusive relationship with another woman. So it is talking about a lot of really heavy stuff. And it's framed with a few chapters that are actually informational on how the media portrays queer women, what queer women who have gone to court for domestic violence have done, or kind of the injustices that they've seen not being taken seriously by the court system and how that complicates things. She also talks about the legality of emotional abuse and different things like that. This was so incredible, so impactful, so beautiful. It's a devastating book, but the way that it's written, I just adored. There are some chapters that are longer, that are maybe more traditional narratives, but a lot of the chapters are shorter, maybe a few paragraphs long. There's one section of it that's a choose your own adventure. I actually took a couple of quotes out of this if you're more interested in it in my video where I pair books with Mountain Goats albums. So if you want to hear more about it, you can check out that video. But this was such an impactful book. Again, one of my favorites of the year. This one I definitely see myself rereading sooner rather than later. The next memoir that I have is The Complete Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This was originally published as 4 comics that were then put into 2 different books, and then they also have the whole collection together. And this documents her experience growing up in Iran while it was in the middle of a lot of regime changes. The first book focuses on her childhood, and then the second book focuses on her adolescence. She ends up moving to Europe and going to high school in Europe, so it looks at her experience doing that and then moving back. So not only does it talk about growing up in Iran, what it was like, not just insofar as politics goes, which it does mention a lot of that, so I learned a lot in that regard, but what it was like being a child and seeing some of that stuff normalized, the violence and other things like that that are going on. And then the second part talks a lot about immigration and having to figure out what parts of what cultures are you actually. Like, she, I guess, has this battle, like, figuring out who she is and how to integrate or not parts of these different cultures. I really love this. This is another graphic memoir. And this was another really brilliant graphic memoir. Both this and Fun Home are really wonderful in slightly different ways. They both have really good narration kind of around their comics. But this one in particular, Persepolis, I think brings some of the characters to life in a different way. Obviously with Fun Home you get her dad and her dad as a character because it's focusing on him. But with this, I feel like there are more characters, and the story is still very much about Marjane, but you still see very much, like, her dad as a very, like, lively character and her grandma. And I think this is more successful in that sort of characterization than a lot of other graphic memoirs that I've read. So, this is really great. And then the last of my 8 great memoirs that I've read in 2020 is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. I think this book started to get a little bit more attention because there's a movie now based off of this. I've not watched the movie yet, but I was sort of wanting to read the other memoir that influenced it too before watching the movie. But regardless, this was excellent. This is one that I would highly recommend if you are not familiar with the United States prison system at all, and you're not really used to reading larger, more bulky history texts. This is a great place to start because it is a really well-written memoir. It's really engaging, especially if you're more used to fiction, but it also has a lot of important information. Bryan Stevenson is a lawyer who works with people on death row, trying to get people off of death row. In the bulk of this book, I want to say like the first half or so, he's talking about a couple of people that he got pulled off of death row who were wrongfully accused or were given a really harsh sentence. And then in the later part of the book, he also talks about minors who were put in jail or in prison for life, which is not something that was supposed to happen. So he's helping these people as they're older, trying to get them out. He also talks about women in prisons as well towards the end, particularly women who are put in jail after suffering miscarriages and different things like that. So there is just a wealth of information in here. And he's talking about all of these different people, but he's also talking about his experiences as a lawyer, particularly being a Black lawyer in the South, primarily working with Black people who are in the prisons. So there's a lot in this book, and it's really well written. So if you're interested in this topic, or if this is like a topic that you're not really familiar with, I think this is a good starting point. So those are 8 great memoirs that I read this year. You can expect a few more lists like this coming out on different genres. If you read any good memoirs this year, let me know about them down in the comments. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.